Hello everybody, my name is Zeke, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite books that I've read so far this year, and usually this would be kind of an exciting video, and it still is. I'm still very excited to talk about the books that I've enjoyed this year, but also having to go through the books I've read, choose my favorites, has really made me reminisce, and not in a positive way, about this year in reading for me. I feel like this year I've read a lot less than I usually do, and not feel like I definitely have, and that's really translated to me not having a lot of favorites to pick from. So I was really scraping the bottom of the barrel, and that's not to say I didn't read a lot of good things this year. I really did, but I was only able to choose like 5 that I would really consider new favorites, which I think is still decent, but I was kind of definitely struggling with making this list and going through everything. But just for some context, out of the 5 books I'm going to talk about, only 2 of them I would actually give like 5 stars. I still really love all 5 of the ones I picked, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about them, but I think that just kind of contextualizes how kind of weird this year has been. But hopefully second half of the year I'll be able to read more. I'm not sure about that one, but I guess we'll wait and see, and I'll just hope for the best. But now I'm going to start actually talking about the books I read, which is what you're here for, obviously. So I'm going to start actually with the 2 5 stars. The first one I'm going to talk about is Love by Toni Morrison. This book is hard to describe, and I'm going to try my best. We're basically following primarily these 2 women and their relationship to this one man who's dead, and he used to own and operate a hotel, and he was a very big figure in a lot of people's lives, but particularly we see how his presence has impacted the lives of these 2 women. One of them was his second wife, and one of them was his granddaughter, and they were both childhood friends, and we're kind of thrust into the book. We really don't know anything, and we slowly piece together the story of everything that happened in their lives, how everything kind of centers on this one man, and how he kind of controlled so much of what happened. And that's a really bad description of this book, because yes, that's what happens, but the book is so much more than just what happens. I think, first of all, the characters in this are insane, and getting to kind of uncover everything about them through little flashbacks and strange writing quirks is the heart of the story. We really don't know what's going on for a lot of it, or at least if you're me, you don't know what's going on for a lot of it, but you steadily build this portrait of these really complex women with a very complicated relationship. Coming from this modern day, we're modern day in the story, that's kind of where we start. We see their lives in the present, and we see the people around them in the present, and then we work back, not chronologically, towards the past and learning everything. And that's the second thing that makes this book so amazing, is the writing. It is incredibly confusing, but it is beautifully written, and it has a very unique structure that I think really adds to just everything I end up getting out of the story. I think it is really serviced by the kind of elusive writing style that she uses, and the out of chronological order way that she decides to tell the story. Because as I keep repeating, getting to go back and see how everything got to be the way it is what makes this book so fulfilling. The ending really just tied everything together really well, and I think kind of proved to me that yes, the writing, it might have been tough to get through at some points, but it really was worth it in the end. But I would say, if this is your first Toni Morrison book, don't do that, because this is not a great place to start, because it is a little harder and more complicated. But I'm definitely so glad I read this, and incredible, and I want to reread it because I feel like I'll just get so much more out of it a second time, because there's so much you can just miss because you're so caught up in being absolutely confused. Next, I'm going to talk about Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. I'm a big Joan Didion fan, and yet I somehow hadn't read this book until about a month ago at this point, and I'm so glad I finally picked this up. This is a collection of essays, as Joan Didion wrote a lot of those, but this is her first one and most popular one, and I would say best one I've read so far. It's split into 3 sections. One is these kind of snapshots of different events that she talks about in her really enlightening prose. I feel like that's kind of a weird adjective to use, but I feel like she's just very perceptive and observant, and she has this very human way of looking at the world that really touches every single person she talks about. The way she's able to describe people and places and events just imbues them with so much life, and I think that's something we can especially see in the later sections of this book. The second section is called like personals. It's about her personal life, obviously, and then the third section, I forget exactly what it's called, but it's about like different places. And in each of these sections, she is very personal, even if it's not the personal stories. And I think for me, what really did stand out to me in this book were those second and third sections where she was able to get a lot more introspective, get a lot more personal. And I think the way she's able to craft narratives around her life and reflect on her life is just so powerful. And I just don't think anyone else can do it quite the way she can. She's very just self-aware, and I think that really comes through, and she's just an interesting person. So when she's talking about her life, it's fascinating to read. I really feel like I always struggle to kind of describe why I love Joan Didion so much, but I feel like just reading this gives you such a good snapshot of what makes her such a great author, because you get kind of a taste of everything, of the narrative she's able to build, but also of her more personal side and how she's able to reflect on her life. And so I think this is a really good place to start with her. I should have started with this book probably, but I'm very glad I finally picked this up, and I gave this 5 stars, and absolutely will be rereading at least selections from this, if not the whole thing, at multiple points in my life, because it just blew me away. Okay, now we're getting more into like the 4.5 category, but I still, as I said, really love all these books. First is a book I picked up completely on a whim, and that's The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. This was written in the 50s, and obviously, like, you can tell it's written in the 50s, but also for its time, I feel like this is very groundbreaking. We're following the society that is very strict, very religious, and their religion is based on Christianity, but it's also kind of twisted to be very against the idea of mutations in humans. We're kind of in this post-apocalyptic world where there are like mutants, and any form of difference is really frowned upon in society. I don't want to say too much because it is short, and I actually think you should go into this knowing as little as possible. I even think the blurb on this reveals too much too early, because I think just the experience of getting to kind of piece together what happened in this world is very interesting, and part of what made me love the book so much. I did not read the blurb before I read it, and I'm very happy about that. But we're basically following this boy. He's the son of a farmer in this like town, village, whatever you want to call it, and he's kind of finding things out about the world around him, about other people, about himself, and eventually something happens that leads to some sort of journey, and I won't say anything more than that. But I think that just the exploration of this theme of difference and how society reacts to difference was very well done, and I really liked these like more sci-fi speculative fiction aspects. For a book written in the 1950s, it felt very unique and very unexpected to just be critiquing society in this way. Now obviously I said I don't want to spoil too much, I won't, but the ending of this was unsettling. I was very unsettled by the ending. It's kind of presented in a weird way where I don't know what the author necessarily intended, but the way that I interpreted it was not necessarily super happy, and I kind of like that about the book. And I think there is a lot of ambiguity kind of in the ending, which personally I'm a big fan of. So I'm very glad I read this, and I'm very glad I picked this up on a whim. And I would definitely recommend it because I've never heard of this before, and it was phenomenal. Next, I want to talk about The Guest by Emma Cline. I think a lot of people really don't like this book, as I've seen by its very low Goodreads rating, but that really has taught me not to trust Goodreads, because I absolutely love this book. It's basically a book about nothing. We're following this woman who, she's kind of a grifter. No, she is a grifter. She moves out to this like nice house with this man, moves out of the city because she's kind of lost and doesn't know what to do, and she did something bad in the city, so she has to go out and escape and kind of hide away. And throughout the book she has to kind of wander around, and it's very much a book without a real plot, other than that like main like motivating factor of she has to be out of the city, and she wants to be with this man here. we're just following her thoughts and her like little escapades around this community that she's ended up in. And I think that because there's no plot, what really makes this such an interesting book is this character. She's very, very unlikable. I think she's unlikable in a way where it turns a lot of people off, but I also think she's a very complicated character, and getting to see her thought process through everything that she does is very engaging. Something that I really like about the story, and I think these comparisons have been made, but I didn't know going into it, is this book is very similar to the short story The Swimmer by John Cheever, which is basically a subversion of the hero's journey in this kind of wealthy suburban America, and we kind of get that again in novel form in this book. And I love The Swimmer so much, one of my favorite short stories, amazing movie version too, but just kind of those parallels really stood out to me, and I really ended up loving it, I think in part because of that, but also I think the book on its own deserves a lot of merit and was very enjoyable to read. I will warn you though, like if you need like really good endings with like really cut and dry, like that something happens, this was not for you, because I will say, like, I think a lot of people hate this book because of the ending, and I completely understand that. Personally, I loved it, I thought it was great, but I think it's very divisive because of the character and because of kind of how the plot ends up, but I was a big fan. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to everyone, so be wary going in, but I was a fan, very glad I read it, and it's obviously made it to this favorites list, so it'll definitely stick with me for a while. The final book I'm going to talk about is another very weird one. It's If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler by Italo Calvino. This book is very experimental. It is, as I said, very strange. We're basically following this character called the Reader, who picks up a book and gets to a certain point in the book where he's like really excited to figure out what's happening next, but then it ends and he searches for a new version of the book, but he can't seem to find it anywhere. And when he finally does, it's a different story for whatever reason, but it's a story that's just as engaging as the last one. And that like process repeats, I think, like 12 times throughout the book. That's basically the whole book. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes with like the narrator is kind of its own character, and it's a very witty book in the way it talks about this main character of the Reader and all the short stories we're talking about and how all those short stories interconnect. There's a lot going on. I think it's absolutely fascinating how everything ends up weaving together, and the reading experience by itself is incredibly unique, as you might be able to tell by my description of it. But obviously it is a little bit of a frustrating book because you do kind of get invested in some of these stories and you do want to know what's going on. But at the end of the day, like the overall structure and this kind of idea of flipping from story to story, it really pays off. And I do think that even though I wish I knew what happened in some of the stories, I'm even more glad that I was able to read such a unique book that I knew it was like different going into it. I had no idea it was like this, and absolutely blew me away. I never read anything like it. Don't think I ever will read anything ever like it again. That didn't sound right, but I think that kind of fits in with the theme of how weird this book is. Once again, not for everyone, but if you like kind of more experimental books, then I would definitely recommend you check this out. And it's really made me want to read a lot more by the author. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Please let me know some of your favorite books so far this year down below. I'd be really excited to hear. Maybe give me some recommendations, because as I've said, I'm very much struggling to find favorite books this year. But if you did enjoy this video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.